Come find out who's been naughty and nice in horse racing on this episode of the Win Place Show. Salutations and welcome, friends. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace, and I'm the host of the Win Place Show, a program devoted to horse racing and handicapping that is proudly part of the Trust the Profits YouTube page. Now, make sure to like this video. Make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits. We got a lot of great content. Aside from the Win Place Show, we have Daily Doubles with Colin Sheehan. We have his Derby prep recaps every Monday as well. We got graded stakes previews with the formulator. We got some great live streams. Been so much fun going to the lounge on Wednesdays and Thursday nights. We have Capping the Card that I do where I run through an entire card, give my top picks and value plays. So we got a lot of content here. Even over the holiday season, we also are going to have a lot of end-of-year content, top 5 lists. Everybody loves those. So make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits to get all of that great horse racing content you need. Because right now, I think we all are feeling a little bit of withdrawal, right? The Breeders' Cup is over. We're still a month plus away from the Pegasus. The Derby Trail is starting to heat up, but it hasn't really kind of started going on full cylinders yet. And so we're in this doldrums a little bit. Now, Oaklawn just kicked off this past weekend, so we're excited about that. Always great to get some new tracks running this time of year. So a lot of going on, but like I said, we got you covered on Trust the Profits for all of it. And again, make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace, and that's where you can get all of my horse racing content, picks, plays, previews, etc. All right, well, we have a lot to cover on this episode of the Win Place Show. We're going to recap some races that took place this past weekend. We're also going to focus on some horse racing news and then focus on a little bit on horse racing news that applies to not just horses, but trainers, jockeys, and more. So where are we going to start? Well, we're not going to actually start by previewing something that took place on the weekend, but rather something that took place just on Monday afternoon. And that is and I say this tongue in cheek to some extent, but the runaway favorite for Horse of the Year, Beverly Park. Beverly Park is a horse I've mentioned on this program before. If you are a fan of horse racing, you have inevitably heard about Beverly Park. Beverly Park has run now 29 times in 2022. That's right, 29 times in 2022. Amazingly, Beverly Park has won 14 times, including on Monday at Mahoning Valley in a 6-furlong starter allowance race. He has won at 7 different tracks throughout the year in 2022. This was his 14th win, again, on Monday out of 29 races. So an absolutely incredible record. We talk about horses being more fragile than ever. Certainly all of the discussion about Flightline, and whether he's worthy of Horse of the Year or worthy of these kind of grand titles that we want to give him in terms of being the horse of a generation, etc. Only ran 6 times. Well, now we have a horse, Beverly Park's run 29 times in a year. So some horses are their workhorses, and they love to run. And the thing about Beverly Park is this is a horse that has really taken to this repeated racing and has gotten better. Actually, the more this horse races, this horse frequently can turn around and run again. One of the things that I think there's often a misperception about from the outside is we have to be very delicate to these horses. We have to be very careful. We have to be very fragile. It's abuse if we run them too much. Every horse is different. I would not encourage anyone to undertake Beverly Park's schedule. I don't want all of our horses running 29 times in a year because, quite frankly, they're not bred to do that anymore, and it may not be particularly healthy for those horses. But there are certain horses that just can bounce back. I mean, I've seen it over the years. There are certain horses that can come back on a week's rest and run a banger of a race. And there are horses that need 3 months in between starts. So there are these kind of differences within the equine breed, and it's just important to always keep that in consideration. Beverly Park, definitely a horse of the people. Like I said, has won at 7 different tracks over 2022 and is not done, is going to probably, maybe fingers crossed, get one more race in before the new year. Beverly Park is nominated for the Dave's Friend Stakes at Laurel. That is a track he has won at already. That race is on Boxing Day for you Canadians out there, but it's on December 26th. That would be a 14-day layoff for Beverly Park between Monday's race at Mahoning Valley and that potential race on the 26th, which is honestly right on par with what this horse has been getting. And it's one thing if this horse was finishing fifth, sixth, seventh. I mean, then you'd be talking about, this is not good. To keep running horses back. And that's where you get into the discussion of, is this abuse? Is this no good? The fact this horse keeps winning and keeps running really, really well. And it's not as if they're dropping this horse all the way down to some low-level claiming race. I mean, they're running this horse at around the same level every time out at different tracks across the country. Good for all the connections. Good for Lynn Cash, the trainer, and excited to see if Beverly Park can run 30 times this year, make it 15 wins and 30 efforts. That would be pretty good. There's some symmetry there. Definitely like that. So wanted to do a quick recap of Beverly Park winning at Mahoning Valley on Monday. But obviously there were some big races over the weekend, going to Los Alamitos in the Starlet. Feza, the Bob Baffert filly, who's 2 years old, beats Pride of the Nile in that Starlet. What a run, too. Those two really separating themselves from the rest of the field. But Feza put down right there in the stretch. And then Pride of the Nile just digs in and just really refuses to give in. So Feza and Pride of the Nile just really go at it. Flavian Pratt, great job on Feza. Very good experience for Feza, too, to really look another horse in the eye and to dig in and to still get by that horse. It was obviously just by a neck, maybe a head, and to win that Starlet. But that was, like I said, great experience. So not only do you have this duel down the stretch where you're battling against another horse, this was also on a big stretch out from 6 furlongs to a mile and a 16th. So you're stretching out. This is obviously a Bob Baffert horse in Feza as well. So we've talked a lot about these Baffert horses that may have to end up going to different trainers for the Kentucky Derby. Well, Feza's a filly who may end up having to go to another trainer if she wants to have a shot at the Kentucky Oaks. Now, she could always skip the Oaks and go straight to the Black-Eyed Susan. So that is a possibility. But Feza is a horse that certainly is in consideration for this. And like I said, I like horses that when they are young, experience that sort of character building performance. It's easy. I don't want to say it's easy because it takes a lot of talent, but when you just blow away competition, you don't know what you have. And it's not every horse is Flightline, right? You're not, in fact, very, very few horses historically are Flightline that can just blow everybody away. You're going to get into a dogfight at some point. And I like to see horses that have already been tested in that way. I mean, this is a reason I like a horse like Gunite, that just is battle tested. That horse just, he's won some, he's lost some, but he knows what to do in those situations. He's faced tough competition. There are horses that are just like that are gutsy. And I like to see what I did out of Feza, really kind of going up against a horse like Pride of the Nile and winning there. So great effort by her. It is interesting. Only earned a 77 Beyer speed figure. And this is a point that David Aragona, who's the morning line maker for New York, brought up. That this is a particularly weak 2-year-old filly class. We've been very spoiled with some very strong distaff classes over the last several years with Malafat and Clairiere and Nest and Secret Oath and a litany of other horses that are in there. Even a horse like Army Wife, really nice horse. So you get these horses that are coming through this distaff division, very, very good. Of course, Latruska, the queen of them all when she was at the top. And now it seems like maybe they're waning a little bit. Like you look at this 2-year-old class and there's just not a lot of pop there. You saw the issues last time out with Julia Shining, who ran 2 weeks ago at that Cigar Mile card. Julia Shining, now you could make a lot of excuses, say she didn't like the track. She still ended up winning, but only earned a 70 Beyer speed figure, so very low. Just hasn't been a lot there in that 2-year-old class. Now, the progression always can come. We talked about this with Nest. Nest's last speed figure as a 2-year-old was an 83, came back out, ran 92.96 next 2 times out as a 3-year-old. So progression from 2 to 3 happens all the time. We certainly hope that's going to be the case. The interesting part about this 2-year-old filly class, though, is they're all kind of around the same speed figures. They're all hovering like between 70 and 80. Nobody's really blowing anybody out of the water yet. So while they may not be particularly fast, historically speaking, they may not be as good as some of the previous distaff and filly classes that have been coming through. It still may be super competitive. I mean, it may be really fun to watch these horses run against each other because they all do seem to have roughly the same ability. So I always try to differentiate between a quote unquote weak field and an uncompetitive field. Those are two different things. A field can be weak but can be extremely competitive. Similarly, you can have some very, very non-competitive fields that are very strong. So it's one of those things where it's just something to keep an eye on, and it's something that David brought up that I thought was a very, very good point. Now, there were some other horses and races that obviously were run this past weekend. One at Aqueduct on Saturday, the Garland of Roses Stakes. Betsy Blue with the win. This might have been the best performance of the weekend. Went last to first and just easily strolled by Beguine coming down to the wire. Actually looked like the jockey was almost easing Betsy Blue up while going past Beguine right at the wire. And so just had this one wrapped up. It seems like just had the measure on it, knew where the wire was and was able to get there. But incredibly gutty effort. Went from last to first in that race. And really, at the top of the stretch, you're thinking, I don't know if this horse has it. The horse is just covered in mud because it was kind of sloppy conditions, muddy conditions that day at Aqueduct on Saturday. And but just dug in and Beguine started to tire, started to drift out. So you started to definitely see that happening from Beguine. But man, a lot. Betsy Blue just came running and just was not going to be denied that at the wire. The Garland of Roses Stakes, really impressive win. I'm always impressed when horses can go from the back to the front in the mud, especially when you see how much kickback back they get, because horses naturally don't like that sort of thing. So to see a horse that can take to it is particularly impressive. It's one thing to take to the mud and the slop. Sometimes you can do that in front running efforts, but to do it from a come from behind is quite the other thing. Speaking of front running efforts, Lovely Ride did that over the weekend at Oaklawn, and the only stakes action there at Oaklawn. Gate to wire win in the slop. Again, bad weather. This is one of those things, the East Coast, the central, Midland part of the United States have just been slammed with really kind of crappy weather. We've not had these kind of crisp, clear winter days. We've had a lot of rain, a lot of clouds, a lot of snow already. Woodbine looked like it was covered in snow over this past weekend. So it's just not been great conditions for great racing. Now, some good performances can still come out of that, but it is something which, sitting at home, you just go, oh, geez, they've been not great conditions. From a handicapping standpoint, sometimes it can get a little complicated. You never know how horses take to certain weather, either the cold or the the surface that they're running on as well. So just other things to keep in mind. One of the races that I did want to give a shout out to over the weekend at Aqueduct was Silver Seeker. Silver Seeker won a race on Saturday at Aqueduct. This is a horse that was second back from a layoff. Now you might go, Matthew, horses second back from a layoff win all the time. You're absolutely right about that. What makes this different is Silver Seeker was second back from a, wait for it, 3-year layoff. That's right. Silver Seeker was off for 3 years. Came back, ran at Hawthorne. I think ran dead last or finished 9th in that race. Then came back and won at Aqueduct on Saturday. So, and Silver Seeker was a horse that had a nice little start to his career too. Won broke maiden first time out, won 3 out of 4 career races before being injured, going to the bench for 3 years. And just an incredible job by the trainer, who is also kind of a therapeutic horse person. And so, really spent a lot of time just trying to rehab the horse. It wasn't about training at any point, but rehabbing the horse. And once the horse got rehabbed, then thinking about maybe this horse still has a little something left. They decided to give it a shot, and son of a gun, if Silver Seeker doesn't win second time out. So only the 6th race of his career, but hard to believe that career has already spanned 4 years in those 6 races, those four initial races, and now 2 this year. So really interesting. We'll see if he continues to run next year. But that was a really great story, I thought, to see a horse come back from a 3-year layoff to get a win. Now, I wasn't here last week to give a rundown after the Cigar Stakes card, but one piece of horse racing information that I did want to share from that card was handle was down huge. This is an issue with horse racing, obviously. We've seen handles actually go up traditionally. We've seen some good news in that regard over the Derby, trail, and over the Derby weekend, and during the Triple Crown, and during the Breeders' Cup, et cetera. We've seen handles increase. Of course, inflation plays a part of that, of course, but the Cigar Stakes handle went down from 2021 at $16 million to 2022 at only $10 million. That's right. There's a $6 million decline in the handle brought in at the Cigar Stakes. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. There was no carryover this year. Last year, there was a carryover. There was no turf. Interestingly enough, last year, they were still running turf races at Aqueduct during the Cigar Mile weekend. All right. So that was a big difference. There are fewer entrants, which leads to worse, which leads to more entrants, leads to better gambling opportunities, and wagering opportunities. And then finally, the weather. So there are a lot of factors that you can point to explain why it went from 16 to 10, but that's a bad trend that obviously Nairo is going to want to reverse. We're going to have to keep an eye on to see what the Aqueduct handle looks like, over the weekends during this meet. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. But obviously a big decline there from $16 million in 2021 to only $10 million in 2022. The other thing that came out of that Cigar Stakes day that I did not get a chance to speak about really was obviously the outcome of the Cigar Mile. Huge win by Mind Control. What a gutty effort. What a cool horse. I'll be the first one to admit that I was wrong. I went with Zandon up top there. I thought he was just going to be the class. I thought Mind Control, he did not overwhelm me when I saw him at Parks run last time. I know it was a DQ and he got placed first, but that was a very, very weak DQ. And a lot of people were, scratching their head over that DQ at Parks that day. And so, he got passed by an inferior horse that day in the stretch. And I thought, maybe he's seen his better days, but man, he loves Aqueduct, dug in, got a big win. But the big takeaway I had from the Cigar Mile was, man, does this 3-year-old crop stink. I don't mean to be too harsh, but Zandon just absolute no-show. White Abarrio, I thought ran very well. I give all the credit to White Abarrio, who I really like a lot in terms of the connections. C2 Stables, always a stable that I root for because of everything they do for equine aftercare. But, that 3-year-old crop, I mean, based on what we saw at the Clark with Rich Strike, then what we saw with Zandon here. I mean, Epicenter obviously injured, retired. Cyberknife kind of disappointing at the Breeders' Cup Mile against Cody's Wish. There's just, you look at that 3-year-old crop and you just go, oh, there's just not a lot. And the more I watch that 3-year-old crop, I mean, I still would vote Epicenter as the champion 3-year-old. Honestly, the more I watch, the more I'm just going to vote Modern Games. And I don't have a vote, but the more I would vote for Modern Games because Modern Games is the best 3-year-old in the world, I think. And I know he's only run in the United States or North America twice. He won a Breeders' Cup and a Woodbine Mile with ease during that time. And, it's clearly the class of that turf mile field. And so I just think he's a more dominant 3-year-old than anybody else we have. But it'll likely go to Epicenter. But like I said, just really disappointed with this 3-year-old crop and how it's progressed. Was really hoping for a little bit more. We'll see if some of these rivalries maybe perk things up next year. But hard to get too excited when Zandon just, was a complete no-show in that Cigar Mile. Well, let's transition to some horse racing news. And unfortunately, it was not great. Obviously, the big news coming out of horse racing this past week and weekend was Jason Service pleading guilty to regularly doping horses under his care. Of course, this is a case that was brought on by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the federal government over a series of years. I mean, I've been covering this case, it feels like, since I started doing this show, a year ago before I joined Trust the Profits. And so there's just continued saga in this case. Service obviously is someone that everybody has known for a long time was guilty of this. Finally, like I said, pled guilty. And now the big question, shifting this back to horse racing, is about maximum security. And the Saudis have not yet made a decision about whether or not to DQ maximum security from his Saudi Cup win. Now, the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia released a statement and said they continue to monitor developments in the United States with the ultimate aim of concluding an investigation related to the running of the 2020 Saudi Cup. Over the coming weeks, they will assess their ability to conclude the investigation, which began in March of 2020 in a robust and comprehensive fashion. And that was the official release from the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia. Now, here's the thing. Maximum Security passed all of his drug tests, but officials in the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia have said that if they can comprehensively prove that drugging surrounding the race took place, leading up to or immediately after the race took place, then they have the rights to disqualify the horse and redistribute the purse money, $6.5 million in winnings. They would redistribute that to Midnight Bisou. That's right. Midnight Bisou came in second, won $3.5 million. They would actually redistribute that money. Midnight Bisou would then be declared the official winner of the 2020 Saudi Cup. Obviously, this is a black eye for the sport anytime service and these guilty pleas come to the forefront, but it forces us to reckon with these things. And it forces us, I think, to reckon with what happens when everybody kind of knows, right? I mean, I'm not plugged into horse racing in the way that somebody who works for DRF is, but even I had heard the whispers about service well before Maximum Security ran in that Kentucky Derby. And so these were the sorts of things where I think as a handicapper, I know there's a lot of people out there as a bettor as well who will say, that's great that Midnight Bisou gets that $6.5 million redistributed. What about me? What about the bettor who it gets the raw end of the deal? And, a horse, well, that horse was actually tested positive for illegal drugs and illegal supplements. So we're going to DQ that horse. This other horse wins. Months later, tickets are already cashed. Tickets are already thrown in the trash. This is a problem. And it's a problem from a handicapping perspective as well, that when we sit down and talk about, well, what horses are we going to pick? There are certain times where I've definitely picked horses that I have a feeling the trainer, may sometimes put a little extra in the oats and water. And that has to go into your calculations, but it's an inexact science. And it's so frustrating to not have that transparency. It's frustrating that these decisions are made months later, years later, in some cases. In the case, obviously, here with Maximum Security, if a decision will be made. But it's something which, again, it all comes back to the health of the horse. Whether I lost $20 on a race is neither here nor there. Whether I picked a horse up top or second is neither here nor there. It's about protecting the horse. But there are all these other ancillary impacts, right? So we have to consider all of this in totality. And of course, come back to taking care of the horse as our number one agenda, our number one priority. And these sorts of cases make us confront the fact that there's a lot of bad actors in the sport. And there are a lot of bad actors who are still out there in the sport. And there's a lot of bad actors who are shipping horses to kill pens and things like that. I mean, it goes far beyond just putting a little extra supplement into a horse's feed or injecting a horse with a little extra supplement than they're allowed and hoping the body metabolizes it a little bit more, quickly. These are the sorts of things that we're having to grapple with as a sport. It's unfortunate, but it's where we are. So moving on to some different news and kind of changing pace a little bit from obviously the service story, we do want to send, all of us here at the Trust the Profits want to send a big speedy recovery to Dwayne Lucas, who was thrown from his workout pony over the last week and broke 5 ribs. Needless to say, Dwayne is going to be held up for a while, and we certainly wish him a speedy recovery. Hope to see him back there on the ponies soon. It's been great to see the resurgence of Dwayne Lucas over the last year, obviously with Secret Oath, but he's got a few other really nice horses in there as well, and the success of Secret Oath has allowed for some other owners to start pointing their horses towards Dwayne as well. So it's great to see someone who I grew up with when I was a teenager, in the 80s and 90s, I wasn't a teenager in the 80s, but when I was young, I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, Dwayne Lucas he was the Bob Baffert of my generation, right? He was always at the Derby. He had that iconic look. He had the shades and the Stetson, and you just knew Dwayne Lucas when you watched the Derby. And he had faded from sight, and now to see him come back has been a real joy. I've enjoyed seeing that a lot, and obviously wish him a speedy recovery. So speaking of recoveries and people coming back to the track, there's been a lot of horses that took some time off, took some breaks off, and are now coming back and working out. So a few of those horses of note. Pauline's Pearl is back on the workout tab after 5 months away. So that's a big horse coming back for Steve Asmussen there. Another Asmussen horse that's returned to the track for the first time since the Breeders' Cup to work out is Gunite, who turned in an extremely slow 4 furlong, 52 and 4 furlong workout. Asmussen's not, this is a stretch the legs type of workout. I mean, Gunite's not pointing towards a particular race yet. This is just to get out there. It was a little, eye catching to see that 52 and 4 furlong work for a horse that is as classy as Gunite is. But it also speaks to just how much the Breeders' Cup takes out of these horses sometimes. And this is the one thing they're pointed towards. And after that, there's always a little bit of a letdown. We've seen that with some horses that have tried to come back, notably Rich Strike, maybe a little too quickly after that Breeders' Cup. But a few other horses of note that have started to enter the workout tab again: Sparkle Blue, the Grand Motion horse, Ivar, Field Pass, In Love, Stolen Base, Jackson Traveler. Some familiar names there coming back on the workout tab. Hope to see those horses obviously running well in 2023. As we get to the conclusion of 2023, the other big news is leading first crop sires, and we have a humdinger in our hands. This almost feels like the end of the Breeders' Cup distaff this year. It's a 3-way photo between Bolt Doro, Good Magic, and Justify. Right now, Bolt Doro holds a very narrow lead for leading first crop sires. His progeny have earned $2.55 million, with Instant Coffee being his top earner. Good Magic coming in second with $2.45 million, Blazing Sevens being his top earner, and then Justify coming in third at $2.35 million, with Verifying being his top earner. So, like I said, Bolt Doro, Good Magic, Justify, only $200,000 separates Justify from Bolt Doro, so that 2.55, 2.45, 2.35. Some races to come that could impact this. We'll see. See some of these 3-year-old races, wrapping up here, or I should say 2-year-old races kind of wrapping up this last couple of weeks of 2022. We'll see if Bolt Doro, Good Magic, or Justify ends up being the leading first crop sire. Well, I wanted to finish this episode on a good note, and that is to just give my most sincere congratulations to CODY'S Wish and all of the connections for being the Vox Populi winner in 2022. Obviously, all of us were just, melted, I think, by the story of CODY'S Wish and the connection to the young man that the horse is named after. And these are the stories that just melt your heart. These are the stories that make you fall in love with the sport in a lot of ways and fall in love with horses. At least it does for me. And I've seen in my life how much of an impact horses can have on young people and people of all ages with disabilities. Equine therapy is truly amazing to see how much change a horse can bring to a person with disabilities. Is remarkable to see how it helps their body, helps their mind, helps their soul. Is truly just one of those remarkable things that just shows you how special these horses are, how special these animals are, how much you want to protect them because of that and do right by them. There's some great local organizations out there across the country. So as we come to this time of year where we consider giving and things along those lines, I encourage you, take a look, see if there's a local equine therapy organization in your area, in your neighborhood. Consider giving $25, $50 to them to help all the things that they do to help those with disabilities and to help those who are helped so much by the animals that we love. Well, that is it for this episode of the Win Place Show. We will be back tomorrow. We're going to be dropping some information on HISA. I'm going to be dusting off my old political science professor hat. which I did for a long time, to talk about constitutionality and federal district courts and all sorts of fun things. But we're going to get to the bottom of HISA and what that all means. We got some great interviews coming up with people in the sport next week as well. So a lot of great content here. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits. Well, until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.